Welcome back to Press the Button. This week, we're bringing you a different sort of episode.
Yes, indeed, Michelle. Instead of our usual show, for this week, we'll do a retrospective on everything nuclear that happened in 2020. The good, the bad, and the really, really bad.
And we should warn you at the beginning that these are our own personal lists of how we saw the year. And if you think that we missed something or you disagree, we'd love to hear from you. DM us at PressButtonPod or send us an email at pressthebutton@plowshares.org. Okay, Tom, I'm definitely one of those bad news first type people. Let's start there. What was your top nuclear threat from 2020?
Well, there's so many to choose from, Michelle. But, I think if you take two of the worst things from 2020, one, of course, being COVID-19 and the pandemic, and another being an impulsive President Trump with his finger on the nuclear button, and you smash those two things together, you essentially get my worst nightmare, which is President Trump with COVID with his finger on the button. And we'll all remember that in October, that's exactly where we were. President Trump got COVID. He went to the hospital. With him in tow was the nuclear football that allowed him to control all U.S. nuclear weapons. He could have delegated that authority to the vice president, but he chose to keep it to himself. So for those few days, the only thing that stood between us and nuclear war was an impulsive President Trump on mind-altering medications. And I have to say that really was unsettling. And we got lucky that nothing happened during those few days. But had there been some kind of crisis, some kind of false alarm, some kind of international contentious moment, that could have been a real issue. But like so many things, we got lucky. Trump got better. And if we're really lucky, we'll get to January 20th without Trump ever having to order a nuclear strike, which I think we all just have to count our lucky stars that we've survived the last 4 years.
And I totally agree that was, I think, one of my top terrified moments of 2020. And, it's interesting because it's something we had talked about, right, for over the previous 4 years of what does it mean that any single person has control of the U.S. arsenal. And so to see it so quickly end up in that situation, it was definitely something that was really scary. I think the other thing for me, though, that came pretty close to it was the tensions with Iran. I mean, we nearly went to war with Iran, twice? This is still the same year as the U.S. assassination of General Soleimani, which nearly got us into another shooting war in the Middle East.
And it's hard to believe or remember that was this year. The Soleimani was 2020.
January 3rd. I remember we had so many high hopes for 2020, and that was the moment I knew it was not going to go well.
Bad omen. Bad omen.
And then, more recently, right? Like you can argue with me on that of like, is it nuclear? Well, what is it just a few weeks ago where, we have these news reports that Trump is considering a military strike in response to questions about news about how far Iran has come in its nuclear program and how it's responded to the U.S. pulling out of the JCPOA. And that just for me was, and this was right after the election results came out. And so for me, I am ready for 2020 to be over, and I am ready for a new U.S. president.
I completely agree. I guess another one on my list was, and this is something not just from this year, but from the past 4 years, was the incredible rise in U.S. defense spending, which in and of itself, creates a problem for for budgets and how much money we're not spending in other areas. But it particularly creates a problem in our field, nuclear policy, because the more money the Pentagon has, the more they can afford things they frankly don't need, like nuclear weapons. And so the tremendously high defense budgets this year, $740 billion, means that the Air Force, for example, can move ahead on things that otherwise they might choose not to, like the new intercontinental ballistic missile program, which will cost about $260 billion over its lifetime. These are the kind of things that if we had constrained budgets, the Air Force just wouldn't do, because if they had to choose between a new ICBM and a new fighter jet, they'll choose the fighter jet every time. So it's these unconstrained, continually rising defense budgets that are contributing, frankly, to the new arms race and the unnecessary and wasteful modernization program that we're in.
And so rounding out my top three is actually, I think, the flip side of that coin, right? Because you need the defense budgets and what goes into building an arsenal is one side of it. And then the other side of it is arms control and cooperation. And so for me, I think what I saw in 2020 was the continued rise of this go it alone mentality for nations. And you actually saw it in a non-nuclear space in terms of how we responded to the pandemic, the US pulling out of the WHO. We're seeing it now in these race for vaccines. I mean, the blame, trying to close down borders, not just out of a sense of trying to prevent the spread, but also, kind of hunkering down and not looking to cooperate with neighbors to address this transnational threat. I saw as something that is also very much a threat in the nuclear space. And of course, the way we're seeing it is, the weakening and fall of arms control treaties. And now, questions about whether or not we're going to see this extension of New START. Obviously, we have high hopes that a Biden administration would extend it, but I've pretty much given up all hope for seeing it before then.
Yes, and I completely agree on your third threat there, and I would just focus on the New START aspect of this and how certainly it seems in the Republican Party anyway, there's been an increasing willingness over time to treat nuclear security and treaties as political footballs, right? That sort of, when politicians come to think about nuclear policy, it's politics first and policy second. And we saw that with the New START extension, right? The Trump administration had the entire year to work out an extension of New START with Russia. Russia's been saying for months that they're willing to do a clean, no conditions, 5-year extension of New START. And could the Trump administration do that simple thing? No, because what they were looking to do was use that as an opportunity to focus the defense debate on not Russia, but China. And so they bring China unnecessarily into the whole discussion. And they basically say that we will not extend New START with you, Russia, unless China is part of it. And that takes months for us to wait for that to work itself out in the way that we knew it would, which is that China was never going to do that. But that was incredibly valuable time that was lost, wasted, sort of just pointing a finger at China for no good reason. China, as much as we would love to see China engage in a strategic dialogue, has very good reason to sit out New START, in part because their arsenal is 10 times smaller than either the United States or Russia. And so China was never going to play in this game. Yet the Trump administration strung out this process with Russia in a political effort to bring China in. And when that didn't work, still wouldn't agree to extension with Russia to try to create some political leverage and create a political win right before the election by getting something out of Russia that ultimately Russia wasn't willing to give. So this whole thought that you can use nuclear treaties and nuclear security as a domestic political issue is really disturbing. And let's hope that with a new administration, with the Biden administration, that will put that chapter aside and just return to dealing with nuclear security as the important national security issue that it really is.
Okay, but before we get to the fun stuff, let's talk about what the obstacles were to mitigating some of these threats that we talked about. And added challenge, the answer can't be Trump, because we do know that, President Trump and the administration, we just discussed ways in which we saw them making the situation worse. But these problems also, some of these reflect problems that have been there, predating his administration and, now extending into a new one.
Right.
What were some of the other obstacles that you saw that prevented better outcomes?
Well, so yes, we can't blame this all on Trump, but we can blame a lot of this on Trump. I mean, Trump.
No, definitely. I'm just trying to.
No. I hear what you're saying. But what's interesting about this is that, if anything would have created some public backlash on nuclear policy, it would have been what the Trump administration was trying to do, right? We saw President Trump withdraw from the INF treaty, President Trump refusing to extend the New START treaty, not this year, but previously President Trump pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal. All of these things to us were awful. Yet none of them provoked the kind of public engagement and the public outcry that would have been necessary to stop them. And I think that, to me, is the largest obstacle we witnessed in 2020, is that it's really hard to get the public engaged in nuclear policy issues. And maybe that's a failure of our community, that we're not describing them well or messaging or framing them the right way. And maybe it's just that, there's just too much competition in the public space of ideas and proposals, and people are just focused on other things. But frankly, I think that's the answer. Since the end of the Cold War, people have moved on to other issues, either rightly or wrongly, and they're simply not focused on the nuclear danger as they once were, and as they need to be for us to really be able to solve these issues. But I'm hoping, and one of the contributing factors to that, of course, was COVID-19. Having this entire year essentially dominated by COVID and the presidential election meant that it was very difficult to have any other conversation with the public to get them focused on other issues. So I see that as a real obstacle for us this year, and a continuing challenge for our community is, how do we get the public to prioritize these issues in their own thinking, in their own actions, and in their communications with members of Congress?
There's a related issue, I think, which comes to mind to me when we talk about obstacles, and that is what some call the new repression of civil society, or closing civil society space. Mm-hmm. So fundamentally, when we talk about reducing nuclear threats on the show, a lot of the times the way we talk about it is through fundamentally democratic means, right? It's citizens and putting pressure on elected officials to change policies. And so the successes of our work also rise and fall with the state of democracies around the world, or if countries aren't democracies, how well their citizens can affect their government policies. And it's really well documented, right, that this trend of rising authoritarianism, even within democracies, and the challenges that NGOs are facing, whether it's lawfare, whether it's questioning where funding comes from, whether it's abilities to organize or protest peacefully, all of those things also affect our ability to make change. And I think that will continue to be a challenge in years to come.
What else did you see out there?
I think I thought about Congress. So yeah, and I think this is, kind of what to you we're saying of maybe it's one step further. I think of the US, and it's just, we need to see a more united front on sticking to some of these issues, and with such a fractured set of interests, priorities, and actions, you don't see change.
Right. And that's, one thing we can't look forward to next year is a more united Congress. We're just going to have as much a divided Congress as ever, assuming things go as people are predicting in Georgia, but we'll have to see.
What about you? Any other obstacles that come to mind?
I think the most surprising one, and again, this one I'm hoping will be ending soon, but was just how COVID dominated the debate for an entire year. No one could have foreseen that, but it took over our lives, quite literally, in a way that dramatically changed the political landscape. And so I'm hopeful that at least for part of next year, we'll be able to shift the conversation away from COVID, but there's also opportunities in that too. I don't want to.
I was going to say I was like, I know where this is going. Okay, Tom, opportunities. You can talk about them now. You can talk about them now.
So of course, 2020 was just a dramatically awful year in terms of the pandemic, and the 300,000 American lives and many more internationally that it has cost, and its impact on the economy, and everything else. But the opportunity that it creates is for us to look at COVID-19 as a clear national security threat, a threat to the American people. And yet the amount of money we're spending on defense, again, over $700 billion, hardly any of that was focused in that way. And none of it was served in any way to prevent this catastrophe. So it's an opportunity. We are called upon to rethink how we deal with national security and what we call a threat, and how we prepare ourselves for those threats. And so I'm really hoping that the incoming Biden administration takes this opportunity to transform the way we think about national security, right? And to think about how much we're spending on the Pentagon, and is that money going to address the most serious threats we face? Are our traditional ways that we spend defense dollars actually going to the highest priorities? And I think they're not. I think the defense budget is not focused on things, the most important things we have to do, whether it be public health and pandemic response, or climate change, or just the fact that the American people do not feel safe, given the racial injustice that has been exposed over the past year through the Black Lives Matter movement and other things. The defense budget isn't addressing any of those things. What is it funding? In a lot of ways, nuclear weapons that we don't need. So I think there's a real opportunity here to shift money out of the Pentagon budget, out of nuclear programs, and into these other programs that, to me, are much more pressing and much more directly address the threats that this country faces.
I totally agree in terms of opportunities. The wish list, right, for the Biden administration of extending New START, reentry into the Iran deal, restarting diplomacy with North Korea. I think there are plenty of opportunities there. And I would also make a plug for a, no first use policy and some of the other recommendations that you and Secretary Perry wrote up in the book. I do think the other thing, though, that I see as an opportunity is this civic engagement. I mean, even despite in the face of the pandemic, what you saw were people, even though their governments were failing them, reaching out to fellow citizens to offer aid. I mean, the rise of and strengthening of mutual aid networks across the country, I thought was just incredible. The protests over the summer against racial injustice. I mean, it shows that people care and they see how life can be better. They can make their communities better. And so I do have hope that I do think that's an opportunity. And I do have hope that that can carry through into this new year. Although, of course, how we all engage it remains to be seen.
I couldn't agree more that, the Black Lives Matter movement was such a huge opportunity for bringing people together, for creating public discourse and public engagement throughout 2020. And, as we remember, I mean, that all happened in May. I mean, George Floyd happened in May. And that was after COVID hit, right? And so all of this is happening kind of at the same time. Yet there was still a tremendous outpouring of people in the streets, nationwide, international response, outrage to what was going on. And let's just hope that that kind of public engagement, discourse, and involvement lasts, continues into next year, and keeps going, because I think that there's a huge amount of potential and opportunity to get people more engaged in public policy.
The other thing that really gave me hope in 2020 was that the 50th state ratified the ban treaty, which means it will be entering into force in January of next year, actually just a few days after Biden's inaugurated. And that to me was just this story of, talk about organizing, of people around the world in states that don't have nuclear weapons, but recognize the threat that nuclear weapons pose, and saying that, these weapons should be illegal, I think, and seeing that, seeing them reach that threshold and knowing that it will be entering into force and be international law was really inspirational. And I think is just this opportunity to continue in years to come.
Couldn't agree more. And I guess the last thing I would say on opportunities, I'm really hopeful that when the Biden administration comes in, it will see that it has a transformational opportunity to shift our budget priorities and our defense priorities around, right? I mean, we're going to have President Biden assuming office with this incredible array of crises in front of him. Even though the vaccine is finally here, it's going to take a while to deal with COVID. We have the residual of racial injustice that was revealed or focused on finally this year, but of course not solved. You'll have that. Of course, we'll have climate change that is, of course, still with us because we have not been able to get our arms around it, and plus the economy that is in dire straits. So, incoming Biden administration will have to be dealing with all of these things. And in many ways, this is a perfect moment for the administration to take a bold approach to all of this and completely, rethink the way we're addressing security issues through this, and take a bold sort of new approach to nuclear policy in the context of all of this. And certainly moving to extend New START quickly, get back in the Iran nuclear deal, and then, really go after some of these longer term things like no first use, as you said, and shifting money out of nuclear policy, in particular, the new land-based ballistic missile, and putting that money into these areas that are frankly much more important to the safety and security of the American people. I'm not confident the administration will do that, but I'm hopeful. And so, I'm hopeful that in 2021, we will see the Biden administration taking some steps towards these bold new directions.
I couldn't have said it better. And, I think this is maybe where this moment feels different than 2008 of, I'm really hoping the administration does these things, but also completely cognizant that we're going to have to continue to work for them. Those who want to see these policies are going to have to continue to push. And we can't repeat, the same mistakes. And I know not everyone did this, but enough people did, right? Of really trying to focus just on kind of insider politics instead of as well continuing to engage those across the country, continuing to ensure that these issues were clearly relevant to various communities' lives and were worthy of speaking out on. And it's something we're just going to have to continue to push on. I don't expect many things to come easy.
Couldn't agree more. And maybe one last plea that we remember what happened in the Obama administration, where President Obama had great plans, great ideas, and great aspirations for what to do on nuclear policy. Yet I don't think we as a community invested enough in giving him the grassroots and public support he needed to deliver on that agenda. So even given the high hopes we have for an incoming Biden administration, let's not forget that people need to stay engaged. We can't let this, we can't assume that the new incoming administration will take care of this by itself. We need to be kind of the thorn in the side, if you will, pushing to make sure that the administration not only meets the promises that it's made, but goes further.
Well, Tom, I think that just about covers it for 2020. I know I'm ready to get into the new year, but before we do, I think there's something else the pandemic has reinforced for me, and that's valuing the relationships and the people in this community and who I work alongside. So thank you so much for doing this show with me over the past few months, from our respective homes. And I also just want to extend some sincere appreciation to our partners in this work. I know we can be kind of dour on this show sometimes, but we know that we're in good company and people who are also fighting the good fight.
Well, Michelle, I want to thank you. It's been quite a year. It's been a lot of fun doing this show with you. And again, I as well appreciate all my colleagues in this field. Everyone has really managed to stay hopeful under very difficult times. And I too am ready to say goodbye and good riddance to 2020. But before we do, we should thank our listeners because they've been so supportive throughout the entire period.
They really have. And I don't know about you, but I hear stories from time to time of how much people appreciate the show and good ideas and constructive feedback. And, the show wouldn't be where it is today without all of you.
So on behalf of all of us here at Plowshares Fund, thank you so much. We could not have done it without you, and we can't wait to speak to you again in the new year.
Here we come, 2021.
Thanks for listening to Press the Button. This podcast is produced by Delphine Vigil, Zach Brown, Derek Zender, and Will Lowry. Sound design by Derek Zender. Audio engineering by Derek Zender and Will Lowry. Our theme song is by Lyrics Born and the Poets of Rhythm, sampled with kind permission. Additional music by San Francisco-based bands 17 Evergreen and the Society of Rockets. To continue the dialogue and support our work, visit plowshares.org.